The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding will start shortly.
Order, order. I call on Christina Rees to move the motion.
It's always a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir George. I beg to move that this House has considered E-petitions 603988 relating to breed-specific legislation. The prayer of the petition states, "We are not satisfied with the response to the previous petitions making requests relating to breed-specific legislation, and the recent report by Middlesex University commissioned by the government at a cost of £71,621 has now cast doubt on one of the core assumptions of the Dangerous Dogs Act, that certain breeds of dogs are inherently more dangerous. The government should therefore immediately repeal breed-specific legislation. There are 4 breeds banned under the Dangerous Dogs Act 1991. The Pit Bull Terrier, the Japanese Tosa, Dogo Argentino and Fila Brasileiro. Dogs suspected of being of a prohibited type are assessed against a standard which describes what a particular type should look like. For example, Pit Bull Terrier types are compared with a 1977 American Dog Breeders Association standard, and the dog is expected to approximately amount to, be near to, or have a substantial number of characteristics described by the 1977 standard. However, the number of characteristics is not defined, neither is the way in which the assessment should be conducted, which results in many legal breeds and crossbreeds fitting the standard, regardless of the dog's behaviour. The petition we are debating this evening was created by Anita Mehdi. and when I last checked has attracted 114,557 signatures, including 113 in my Neath constituency. But the closing date is the 21st of June, so these figures may have increased. The House considered E-petition 300561, which called for reform of breed-specific legislation on the 7th of July 2021. And I am sure that members are familiar with that debate, so I intend to focus on the specific issues raised by Anita, who I was fortunate to meet before this debate. Anita told me that her dog Lola had been seized by the police in August 2019 because it had been brought to their attention that Lola could be a banned breed. The dog legislation officer identified Lola as pit bull type based on her appearance, and a destruction order was made. Lola had never shown any aggression towards anyone and had never been involved in any incidents. Anita sought a court order so that she would be allowed to keep Lola. The court considered evidence put forward that Lola was not at a risk to the public and agreed that Lola could stay with Anita, subject to conditions that Lola was neutered, microchipped, and always kept on a lead and muzzled in public. Anita told me that before Lola was seized, she did not know anything about breed-specific legislation and was horrified to discover that dogs were being destroyed because of their appearance and not because they had harmed anyone. Anita believes that there should be legislation to take action in respect of dangerous dogs, but this should not be breed-specific. Many dog owners have contacted her about the adverse effect on their mental health when their dogs have been seized, and also the practical difficulties of owning a dog that has been exempted by court order. Anita wants to see breed-specific provisions repealed and the Dangerous Dogs Act amended to focus on dogs that are dangerous and on owners who mistreat their dogs, with increased penalties for offenders and possibly reintroducing dog licences. Of course.
I thank very much indeed. I think it is quite clear that breed-specific legislation does not work in terms of its intended purpose, which is, according to the legislation, to reduce the number of serious attacks on humans by dangerous dogs. And does she therefore agree with me that a fundamentally different approach is required to tackle all kinds of dangerous dogs and to look at the whole issue of licensing, which she has mentioned, for training, and to make sure that the illicit sale of dogs is prevented and proper controls are introduced? That requires a totally different approach to legislation than what we have at present.
Christina Rees.
My honourable friend, as usual, has probably covered all the points I'm coming on to in my speech. With no collusion here at all. But I completely agree with my honourable friend. Before this debate, I also met with the RSPCA and the Dog Control Coalition. The coalition was formed in 2019 with 5 members: the RSPCA, Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, Blue Cross, the British Veterinary Association, and the Dogs Trust, whose operations of rehoming and promoting animal welfare had been detrimentally affected by Section 1 of the Dangerous Dogs Act 1991. The Scottish SPCA and the Kennel Club subsequently joined the coalition. After 30 years of breed-specific legislation in the UK, these organisations joined forces to raise awareness of the ineffectiveness of the legislation in protecting public safety and its negative impact on dog welfare. They told me that breed-specific provisions in the Dangerous Dogs Act must be repealed because evidence shows that this approach to public safety is fundamentally flawed. the progressive global trend is to repeal breed-specific legislation. The Netherlands introduced breed-specific legislation in 1992 and abolished it in 2008, after a study found that commonly owned dogs were responsible for more bites than breed-specific dogs. Italy introduced breed-specific legislation which banned 92 breeds in 2003 and abolished it in 2009 for similar reasons. Using breed as a predictor of aggressive behaviour is not reliable. Human behaviour, including poor management and inability to provide for a dog's needs, are more likely to cause a dog to be dangerously out of control. The method by which banned dogs are identified is inconsistent and can be subjective because the degree to which a dog needs to match the characteristics of a banned type is not clearly defined. The RSPCA has looked at the science around incidents involving dogs that are dangerously out of control and found that dogs of a banned type were not more likely to be a risk to the public than other dog types, and want the UK government to improve data collection regarding the UK dog population and incidents involving dogs dangerously out of control to make evidence-based decisions. Delighted.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and she's giving a fantastic evidence-based approach to this discussion. And surely it is important that not only we do look at the correct risk factors, but the more that government focuses on breed-specific regulation, which is shown to be unscientific in outcomes, but the less likely then we are to be looking at the real risk factors such as puppy farming, trauma, abuse, lack of training, and the very factors that do need to be addressed to protect the public, and that's the route that we should be going down in the future.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and she's made some really, really good points. I know that my honourable friend is an animal lover and is a champion for the cause, and I thank you very much for your intervention. The Middlesex University Independent Report 2021, commissioned by DEFRA, found that dog bite data is lacking and is inconsistent, but this was used by the UK government to underpin a breed-specific approach to public safety, which casts doubt on the evidence that certain breeds of dogs are inherently more dangerous. Breed-specific legislation means that dogs identified as a banned breed cannot be rehomed, and strays of these breeds must therefore be put down. The RSPCA has put down 310 dogs in the last 5 years because of breed-specific legislation, but reforms would allow dogs that are not at a risk to the public to be rehomed rather than put down. Breed-neutral legislation that contains measures to effectively protect the public from dangerous dogs is needed. A single Dog Control Act that consolidates the current complex legislative framework in a breed-neutral way. Dog control notices should be used proactively to help prevent incidents involving dangerous dogs, and stronger penalties for irresponsible owners. The welfare of dogs...
Would the Right Honourable Lady give way?
Delighted.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Would the Honourable Lady agree that it isn't just these 4 breeds that are dangerous, and it isn't just this section of the Dangerous Dogs Act that needs amending? Because if another dog kills your dog, that owner is not liable for any form of prosecution unless the dog is an assistance dog or unless another human being or the owner actually fears injury themselves. And I believe that dog-on-dog attacks should become a criminal offence and that the owners should be criminally liable where their dog attacks and kills another dog. And this was painfully demonstrated to me in my constituency, where at Christmas a beautiful, tiny Bichon Frise white little dog called Millie was torn apart in Chalkwell Park by two boxer-style type dogs, not on the list of dangerous dogs. The owner did not fear any injury for himself because it was clear the dogs were going for the tiny dog, not for the owner. He had no choice but to carry his dog with its guts hanging out to the vet where the dog was put down. And Michael, understandably, was traumatised by this event, as are many dog owners up and down the country. And we hear about these dog-on-dog attacks pretty much on a weekly basis. So would the Honourable Lady agree with me that Section 3 of the 1991 Dangerous Dogs Act also needs to be amended to make it a criminal offence where an owner allows a dog to kill another dog, irrespective of whether that dog is an assistance dog or where injury is anticipated by the owner? The discrepancy between 5 years for a dog theft...
I think the Honourable Lady needs to take her seat. She's making an important point, but she needs to be aware that an intervention is not the same thing as making a speech, and intervention should be short and to the point. I think she has made her point. She's asked her question, and I'm sure the Honourable Lady who's moving the motion will respond accordingly. Christina Rees.
Thank you, Sir George. I'm very sorry to hear of your constituents' trauma with her dog, and I'm an animal lover and I'm a dog lover, and when something happens to your pet, it's very, very traumatic. And you made a lot of points there, really, really valid points, and I'm sure the Minister was listening. Thank you. I was saying that we need a single Dog Control Act that consolidates the current complex legislative framework in a breed-neutral way. Dog notices should be used proactively to help prevent incidents involving dangerous dogs and stronger penalties for irresponsible owners. The welfare of dogs is compromised on a daily basis as a result of breed-specific legislation. Dogs are put down or kept in kennels for long periods, especially when a decision about whether a dog is a banned type is challenged or subject to restrictions after being granted an interim exemption order. This is an order recommended by DEFRA, whereby the dog owner is assessed as a fit and proper person, and the dog is assessed to be of good temperament, and this allows the dog to be returned to its owner under exemption conditions. The dog must be microchipped, neutered, kept on a lead and muzzled, whilst in public spaces until the case is heard in court. There should be new provisions to ensure the welfare of dogs being kept in kennels is safeguarded. The UK Government's Responsible Dog Ownership Steering Group is welcomed, and it is hoped this will lead to useful changes around education, data and enforcement. But it is very disappointing that breed-specific legislation is not included. Breed-specific legislation is ineffective in protecting public safety and results in the unnecessary suffering and euthanasia of many dogs. It should be repealed and replaced with positive interventions that do not compromise dog welfare. There is no mandatory requirement to report dog bites, but research suggests that people are more likely to report a bite from a suspected prohibitive type. The Office for National Statistics lists 78 deaths from dog bites in England and Wales between 1981 and 2015. The RSPCA found from media reports that of the 34 fatalities between 1989 and 2017, only 9 involved pit bull types. Of the 35 reported and registered dog bite fatalities in the UK between 2005 and 2013, specific breeds were reported in 11 cases, but only 2 involved pit bull types. And between 1992 and 2019, only 8% of dangerously out of control dog cases involved banned breeds. The Coalition believes that identifying certain types of dogs as dangerous can create a false sense of security by oversimplifying the situation, because aggression in dogs is a complicated behaviour involving a range of factors such as breeding and rearing, experiencing throughout lifetime, and for some dogs that are continually kept on a lead and muzzled in public, this can inhibit natural behaviours and in some cases increase aggression. I also met with Jane Dendell, who set up the South Wales charity Save Our Seized Dogs to help dog owners who have had their dogs taken from them under the Dangerous Dogs Act. Jane started her charity after she came across a story about a therapy dog which had been seized as a potential pit bull type. Without being involved in any incidents, the dog owner was a local authority tenant who discovered, after her therapy dog had become assessed as an exempt dog, that she wasn't allowed to keep her dog in her property. So Jane got involved because she wanted to help. Jane told me that the costs of challenging a decision about a dog being a pit bull type is very prohibitive, so her charity can only help a small number of owners. The legislation requires the dog owner to prove that their dog is not one of the 4 banned breeds, which is a very onerous reversal of the burden of proof. When a dog does not conform to the proportional measurements and appearance of a banned breed, Jane recommends that the dog owner obtains an independent assessor's report, which is very comprehensive and runs to several pages, whilst the police evidence is often 1 paragraph of the reason they think that the dog is one of the 4 banned breeds. However, the cost of an independent assessor's report is between £800 and £1,500, but it is often the only method which will save a dog. Unfortunately, when an owner declares they will be paying privately for a second opinion, the option of an interim exemption order is often withdrawn. And some police forces do not use the interim exemption order scheme. But there are many benefits of an interim exemption order. Kennelling costs are kept to a minimum. Kennel space is freed up for dogs who have genuine concern. A dog is not away from home for a long period. There is less pressure on courts for a hearing date, and I'm sure that members will know of the massive backlog of court cases awaited to be heard. And also, breed-specific cases are of low priority. Jane found cases where police forces had encouraged an owner to sign over their dog that had been identified as a banned type, so the dog can be put down and the owner then avoids facing criminal charges. She believes that training for dog legislation officers is insufficient and should focus more on identifying banned breeds. The welfare of seized dogs is of great concern, and when they are returned to their owners, are often underweight, have sores from sleeping on concrete floors, damage to teeth from chewing on the bars of the kennel cage, and have parts of their tails missing from wagging them in an enclosed space. The police keep their kennel and vet costs to a minimum, which leads to poor welfare of seized dogs, and Jane has dealt with several cases of young, previously healthy dogs being found dead in police-approved facilities. Puppies are often seized when under 8 weeks of age, but there is a suspicion, when there is a suspicion that one or both parents may be of a banned breed. But how can the assessment be accurate when good practice suggests that adult dog maturity is around 9 months? Jane recently dealt with one such case, where the puppies were released at 8 months, having been declared not of the banned breed type. The puppies were under-socialised, not familiar with living in a household environment, and very scared. Jane suggests that puppies could be allowed home on a similar scheme to the interim exemption order scheme until they reach maturity and could then be properly assessed. So in conclusion, Sir George, I have some questions for the Minister. Will the UK Government commit to DEFRA's recommendation to commission an independent evidence review to establish whether the banned breed types are an inherently greater risk than any legal breed or crossbreed? Ensure all dogs affected by the Dangerous Dogs Act 1991 have their welfare needs met and safeguarded. Ensure all police forces use the interim exemption order scheme, and when police forces do not use the interim exemption order scheme, they must protect dogs by developing and implying evidence-based, up-to-date kennelling standards. Allow rehoming of dogs by responsible, reputable rehoming organisations assessed by a robust procedure for all dogs seized under the Act. Permit independent assessors to review the welfare of dogs who are kept in kennels whilst awaiting a court hearing. Ensure that there should be no contingent destruction orders and no requirements for exempted dogs, such as muzzling in public, when it has been established that a dog seized under the Act does not pose a danger to the public. Explore alternatives to breed-specific legislation, such as promoting and fostering responsible dog ownership communities, allowing for early and preventative interventions, such as dog control notices, through to severe penalties for those owners who use their dogs to frighten or intimidate. Finally, I should be very grateful if the Minister would also meet the petitioner. Thank you, Sir George.
The question is that the House has considered E-petition 603988, referring to breed-specific legislation. Justin Madders.
Well, thank you, Sir George. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair this afternoon, and can I thank my honourable friend, the member for Neath, for her comprehensive introduction. So my constituency has contributed the second highest number of signatures to this petition, which I think shows my constituents have a great interest in animal welfare matters, and they believe, in a nutshell, Sir George, the breed-specific legislation is flawed, outdated and ineffective, and what it means is that dogs are euthanized simply because of the way that they look. No other options available, no assessment is made of whether that individual dog is actually a danger, and it's argued there is no specific research to demonstrate that these dogs pose more risk than other types of dogs. Now, as a dog owner myself, I regularly take our Labrador Melly on walks through Riverca Valley in our constituency, where we meet lots of constituents, of course, but also lots of other dogs, and they all have very different personalities, and it's very apparent that you cannot judge a dog by what it will look like or what breed it will be. So focusing on 4 breeds only is ineffective, and I think that's been shown by the fact that the breed-specific legislation hasn't improved public safety in the way it was intended to. And as we've heard a number of statistics from my honourable friend in her introduction, I'd just refer to a couple for you. In the past 20 years, dog bites have increased by 154%, but only 8% of dangerously out of control dog cases involved banned breeds. So what is happening with the other 92% of out-of-control dog cases? Why are all the legislative eggs put in one basket, which is only 8% of the problem. And as we know, hospital admissions due to dog bites continue to rise year on year. So I think it's clear the law has significantly failed to set out what it intended to do, and it has not reduced dog bites. It means, of course, as well, that innocent dogs continue to be put to sleep, and tragic fatalities as a result of dog attacks continue. So it's very clear that the law does need re-examining. Public safety must be paramount, and we absolutely cannot have dangerous dogs coming into contact with the public. But I think it's fair to say that if that's what the legislation is meant to do, then it is failing. And as my honourable friend, the member for Neath, referred to, the recent research from Middlesex University was very instructive, and they found that data about dog bite incidents is lacking in record keeping across the country, is inconsistent. And the report said, and I quote, "Participants almost unanimously cast doubt on the idea that the breed was the cause of a dog attack, noting either that dogs are not inherently dangerous if properly socialised and engaged with using appropriate behaviours, or that all dogs could be dangerous if placed in the wrong situations and handled inappropriately." They noted studies which indicated that dog bite incidents should not by themselves be taken as an indication of dog aggression requiring a regulatory response. Statistical data on the extent of dog attacks therefore needs careful interpretation and examination of all the other factors that might be in play. So it does seem to me that a dog's behaviour can be very much influenced by its human owner as well as all the other environmental factors. All dogs can be dangerous in the wrong hands, and action to tackle canine aggression should actually look at the training that has taken place with the animal rather than the crude and ineffective focus at the moment, which is what does the dog look like. And according to the latest data from the Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, around 200 leading behaviour experts found that socialisation is considered the most critical factor. And 86% said that how a dog is brought up by its owner is the most important reason why some dogs are more aggressive towards people than others. And 73% of those experts also said that it is a dog's upbringing by the breeder before they are sold that determines behaviour. So I think it's very clear that that's where the focus really ought to be. Now, I understand the steering group has been set up to look at the recommendations from the Middlesex University report, but it will not look at the legislation itself, despite there being serious questions about whether that is doing what it was intended to. And as we've heard, the RSPCA, Dogs Trust, Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, Blue Cross, the British Veterinary Association and the Kennel Club all want to see the introduction of what they call breed-neutral legislation that actually better protects public safety and, of course, dog welfare. So I think we do need to look at what the evidence and the science is telling us, what the experts say, and I would like the government to commit to a review of the legislation as soon as possible, and I would like them to engage with local authorities, the police and experts from other countries, as we've heard from my honourable friend. There are experiences from abroad that we can learn from and use those to develop a deeper understanding of what actually works in this area, because we've seen that the current legislation does not stop dog bites and is bad for animal welfare. It's very obvious to me that we need a more rounded approach to dog control that focuses on prevention through responsible ownership and education. And finally, Sir George, I just want to talk about how this plays into the wider legislative framework around dogs, because I've had a number of constituents contact me with their concerns about the increase in artificial insemination clinics, which where unqualified people can call themselves a clinic, and that means some people will feel that they're being treated or their dog's being dealt with by a professional when they may have no qualifications at all. And I have to say we've got some real concerns about whether these clinics are safe. We certainly can't be sure that breeding isn't going on there that doesn't need much closer examination. And I think that is another example, that kind of development is another example of how our legislation is well behind the curve in developments in animal welfare, and how there is a need for regulation of these clinics and to ensure professional standards which are in the interests of both the public and in terms of animal welfare. So, Sir George, in conclusion, I think we all want to be a world leader in animal welfare, so we do need to keep up to date with legislation. We do need to follow what the science and expert advice is telling us and base our approach on that.
Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Sir George. It's always a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I would first like to thank the almost 116,000 members of the public and the 149 of my constituents that signed the E-petition on breed-specific legislation. Congratulate the Honourable Member for Neath for her opening remarks as well. I'm pleased to see that there is clear public support to reforming these outdated laws, and I understand the aims of the Dangerous Dogs Act, and protecting the public is of course vitally important, but it's clear that in its current form it's not serving its intended purpose. The fact is, for the vast majority, the risk a dog poses is moulded by owners. While some breeds might be genetically more predisposed to aggressive traits, the way they are raised, trained and cared for has a huge influence on a dog's temperament and behaviour. Any dog with negative experiences or irresponsible owners could show traits that have seen breeds banned under the legislation. The opposite is true too, that banned breeds raised and cared for properly could be harmless. In January, the Government said in their written response to this petition that repealing the legislation with no alternative in place was something that they were unwilling to do because of the increased risk to public safety. I think that's a somewhat lazy response. That the Government have time and time again stated that animal welfare is a priority for them. So why leave this legislation in place when it has a direct negative impact on the welfare of certain dog breeds, and unnecessarily? Ministers have set out an ambitious legislative programme in this space in the form of the Animal Welfare Action Plan, and indeed some of that legislation has already passed. I know that there is some argument that other aspects of that plan have since been watered down, but a reform of breed-specific policies, repealing the current legislation and replacing it, could present the perfect middle ground, but it's not an issue the Government should merely be ignoring. The current legislation has not reduced the number of dog bites in the UK. In fact, the number of bites continues to rise yearly. DEFRA's own stats on the breakdown of bites by breed is notably unreliable. There is no obligation to report dog bites. Lots of the data around dog ownership is based on estimates, and an independent report commissioned by DEFRA found that dog bite data is lacking and inconsistent. The Dog Control Coalition requested dog bite data from 45 police forces covering the period between 2016 and 2020. Only 4 of the forces that provided a response could provide details of the breed or type of dog involved in incidents. There just isn't the evidence to prove the legislation is effective. In fact, you could argue the opposite. An undue focus on the limited number of banned breeds means that we aren't looking at the bigger picture. The worst part of this legislation for me is that whether a dog is banned or not actually does not even come down to their breeding. The Government guidance says whether your dog is a banned type depends on what it looks like rather than its breed or name. So that means that dogs who are not even of a banned breed are seized and in many cases euthanised based solely on a physical characteristic. To be clear, we aren't just talking about aggressive dogs or dogs that have attacked someone. These can be perfectly friendly, loving pets that someone has deemed looks illegal. Dogs seized under the Act will go through some really traumatic experiences too. Seized dogs are put into kennels for months or even years, confined to small spaces and with a much lower quality of life. These environments can actually make a dog more likely to behave aggressively. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Some dogs will get exemption status from the courts where they have been found to be a limited threat to the public, but these dogs do not get to move on and live a normal, happy, fulfilled life. They are subject to conditions such as always wearing a muzzle outside or always being on the lead. Often these dogs are big and energetic, and it's unfair that they will never be allowed to run around, burn some energy, play with other dogs at the park. The muzzles too can be problematic if worn for a prolonged time and can cause discomfort and sores. The law also prohibits charities from rehoming banned dogs, or as I set out earlier, dogs that look like they might be on a banned breed. Regardless of the dog's temperament or personality, they can't go to one of the many willing and loving homes across the UK. That means, very sadly, that euthanasia becomes the only option. Veterinary surgeons, staff and charity employees are seeing huge numbers of dogs put down needlessly, dogs that would have been suitable for rehoming. It's traumatic and awful for everyone involved. It's astonishing that a 30-year-old piece of legislation that we know to be ineffective continues to be applied without scrutiny. I would like to thank the Scottish SPCA for their excellent briefing on this matter and for taking the time to show me around the Lanarkshire Rescue and Rehoming Centre a couple of weeks ago, where there are a lot of loving dogs looking for a new home. The work they do is incredibly important, and I completely back their No Bad Breed campaign. They're nearly at the 25,000 signature mark, so if anybody's looking to support this, go online and find the No Bad Breed campaign. This is really such a complex issue that it can't just be boiled down to breed. And I'd like to pay tribute to their Chief Superintendent, Mike Flynn, who has been urging the Government to review this legislation as it's not fit for purpose. He's done a lot of work in this area. I hope today the Minister will be in a position to acknowledge that there is work to be done in this area, acknowledging the need for reform and bringing it forward. It's not only in line with the overwhelming majority of the public's opinion, but will improve public safety in the round and will prevent the unnecessary deaths of innocent dogs.
Toby Perkins.
Well, thank you very much, Sir George. A great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to start by congratulating my honourable friend from Neath for securing this debate and for the way she introduced it, because I know it is an issue that is felt very strongly right across the country, and I'm sure many people will have appreciated what she said today. I'm also very pleased to be here to speak today on behalf of the dozens of constituents who've contacted me on the issue. In fact, the latest count, 286 people from Chesterfield have signed the petition, and there is no doubting that there is very strong opinion on this issue. We are, as it's well often said, a nation of animal lovers, and I receive more emails and letters regarding animal welfare than almost any other issue. And my inbox is full of people who are concerned about badgers, about bats, about birds, about butterflies, about improving welfare standards in food production, about protecting animals all across the world from poaching or from the destruction of their habitats. But even stronger than our passion for animals is our love of our pets. Our pets, particularly our dogs and cats, are very much a part of the family. We love them and we protect them like a family member. And that's why people, I think, feel so passionately about this legislation, about its unfairness, but also about its ineffectiveness. And why over 115,000 people had signed the E-petition that generated this debate today. I have the great privilege and honour of sharing our house with the family cat Basil, a tiny bundle of energy who many colleagues of mine may have seen appearing on Zoom calls over the last couple of years. And also the family dog, Laurie, who's very old and increasingly smelly, but very much adored by the family nonetheless. And we would all be devastated if anything happened to them, as of course people across the country feel. But it's a particular agony, I think, if our animals are attacked and dogs that get out of control have very serious consequences on the feeling for the whole family when other dogs are attacked, and obviously tragically in cases when children and other people have been attacked. Dangerous dogs are a menace. They're something that absolutely must be clamped down upon. The debate today is not about whether action needs to be taken against dangerous dogs, but about whether the action we are currently taking is the right one. We all have pets that we are very happy to, yeah.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. With regard to the effectiveness of the legislation, I'd just like to point out to him that in the 5 months up to February of this year, there were 69 dog attacks in Gwent police area, and that's a relatively small area. And that can be extrapolated right across the country. And nothing highlights more than that, the ineffectiveness of the legislation as it stands.
Well, I agree with him entirely, and I think we've heard from other honourable members about the importance of recognising that we need legislation that targets dangerous dogs, that targets dangerous dog owners. And when 92% of all attacks are taken place by dogs not covered by the legislation, it is clearly ineffective, as his experience in Gwent has demonstrated. Now, saying, Sir George, we all have pets that we love, or pets that have died who we still miss. And I'm sure everybody understands the distress and extreme upset it causes dog owners who have their pets confiscated, euthanised simply because of their breed or type. Animals that may be well trained and have never harmed anyone. I met with one of my constituents, Annie Littlewood, recently to discuss her dog, Frank, who sadly died recently. Annie had always suspected that Frank might be a pit bull type breed and had lived in fear that he would be confiscated and put down. I have to say that Frank was quite a local celebrity in the Brookside area of Chesterfield. He was a gentle soul. He was loved by everyone who met him. When he was out on walks, people across the community went up to speak to him and to give him a stroke. He was always well behaved. He'd never harmed a person or any other animal, but under the current legislation, he could have been deemed dangerous and euthanised, and clearly that is the reason that so many people have been signing this petition. Now, the Dangerous Dogs Act has often been held up as an example of poor quality legislation that was created in haste and without proper scrutiny or consultation. And whilst, of course, no one wants to see anyone be a victim of a dog attack, we need to ensure that laws that address that are effective and be certain about what they are achieving. And as it's clear, the current legislation is not reducing the dog attacks or improving public safety, then it clearly is not fit for purpose. And so I hope that the government will, when the Minister responds today, indicate a little more open-mindedness to addressing this law and recognising that a wide variety of organisations with real passion in this area believe that the law is currently failing to improve public safety. The RSPCA, the British Veterinary Association, the Kennel Club, many other animal welfare groups all seem to agree that a review is urgently needed and the current law is not working. So I hope the government will listen to these groups. Evidence from the RSPCA suggests that the 4 breeds selected in the legislation, selected 30 years ago, are no more prone to aggression or pose any more significant a risk than many, many other types of dog. And the Honourable Lady from Southend West spoke about the importance of ensuring that there was responsibility for dog owners after dog-on-dog attacks. I think she made an important point about some of the other aspects in the way that this legislation needs to be reviewed. I know that is something that's felt particularly passionately by guide dogs for the blind, because guide dogs that are bred are particularly likely that they're bred and trained to be gentle for obvious reasons. It's incredibly important. And when they come under attack, they're very ill-equipped to defend themselves. It massively impacts on their ability to do their jobs. They are working dogs. And it's terrifying for the blind person who is accompanying them to see these kind of attacks. And so dog-on-dog attacks should be something that are capable of being prosecuted in the way that the Honourable Lady spoke about. Now, when it comes to the creation or amendment of laws, it's vital that we look, as my honourable friend from Ellesmere Port said, at the evidence and listen to the experts. And I know that listening to experts isn't always something that the government has chosen to do, but I think it is our responsibility as legislators and representatives to make sure that that laws are evidence-based. And I think the government should see this as an opportunity to improve public safety by creating a system that focuses on the aggressive behaviour of dogs, focuses on owners who either fail to control their dog or deliberately try to make their dogs more aggressive, rather than this very blunt instrument in terms of the way the legislation is currently envisaged. Responsible dog owners, like my constituent Annie, who've made sure their dog is well trained, balanced and passive, shouldn't have to live in fear that their much-loved family pet could be destroyed because an inspector with a tape measure has determined that they're an illegal type. So let's listen to our constituents, let's listen to the experts, and let's work together to create an ethical system that genuinely improves public safety and doesn't needlessly destroy safe, well-behaved pets.
Dave Dugan.
Many thanks, Sir George. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and thank you also to the member for Neath for securing this debate. I rise to speak in favour of the views that my many Angus constituents have contacted me regarding this situation. And I'm very pleased that in Angus we also have one of the SSPCA's rescue and rehoming centres. I was lucky enough to visit there for the first time after COVID a number of weeks ago and met a gorgeous pit bull bitch who may be rehomed, and I hope that she is, but so many of that breed face a different fate thanks to that legislation, which, frankly, Sir George, simply doesn't work. The evidence isn't there to uphold this legislation. It probably wasn't 30 years ago, and it certainly isn't now. And I hope the Minister, perhaps when she sums up, recognises the sort of neutral, supportive, non-partisan tones at which we're all coming at this debate for. I don't hear anybody swiping at the government this afternoon in the name of this priority. And this is not about dogs' rights versus people's rights to feel safe in the public realm. This is about decency towards animals, which people on these islands have a justifiable, I believe, reputation for upholding across the years. And making sure that people are actually protected from dangerous dogs, because while we're focused potentially on these 4 breeds as set out in the legislation, it rather gives a bit of an easy ride to dangerous dogs that aren't one of these 4 breeds. And the SSPCA are clear on this point, and they say that they're fully supportive of legislation to protect the public, like we all are, but they believe that any breed of dog potentially out of control is a dangerous dog in the wrong hands, and that this legislation doesn't really reflect this. And in essence, they wish to see Section 1 amended so that dogs are judged on the deed, not the breed, which I think is a helpful way of encapsulating it, meaning that dogs are only put to sleep if they pose a demonstrable risk to the public, rather than being just a certain type of dog or other arbitrary qualification. And while these breeds are detailed in the way that they are, it's not incumbent. It presents on legislative bodies, on the courts, and on the law enforcement, police forces up and down these islands, an unnecessary burden. And it can't be easy for professionals in these roles either to follow the law down a cul-de-sac which puts an otherwise healthy animal to sleep. So we need to protect the public, as I've said, and we shouldn't deal in anecdote. But I was bitten by a dog when I was a kid, and it wasn't one of those 4 breeds. And I know people who have made the painful decision to put their own pet down because they had a temperament issue, and it wasn't one of those 4 breeds. And I'm not a small person, Sir George, but I was knocked clean off my feet by an out-of-control Labrador. It was about 10 stone right enough, and its accelerator worked better than its brakes. But nevertheless, nothing to do with these 4 breeds. And I think it's time, 30 years on, to take a very much fresher look at this. Impress upon the Minister, evidence makes better legislation than reputation, and I look forward to hearing what she says to these points. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship again today. And this has been a very focused and consensual debate, and I am pleased to say a few words from this side of the House. This is the second time in just a few months I've had the opportunity to thank my friend, the member for Neath, for opening a debate in this House, and I do so again today. And I'd like to acknowledge the colleagues who've spoken in the debate today and all those who signed this petition. Involvement and engagement with our democratic processes can at times seem difficult, so I am pleased that at least 114,000 people from across the UK, including more than 150 local people in my own constituency of Newport West, have signed this petition. And I thank them for making sure their voices have been heard, and I hope that the Minister responds in detail to the points raised in this debate. The benefit of a very focused debate is that there is no excuse for rambling, dithering or delay, so I shall be as brief as possible, Sir George. I'd like to start by reiterating once again, as I do at every opportunity afforded to me, that these benches believe in honouring animal welfare, and we will always push for the strongest possible animal welfare policies. These aren't just words. Colleagues across the House had the opportunity to help us put our pledges into action during the passage of the Animal Sentience Bill. Alas, Sir George, Tory members of this House voted down every single animal welfare-related amendment, opposed every single suggestion and ignored even the most anodyne of points from the opposition benches. And that is a matter of deep regret. Many people out in the country, including those who signed the petition, believe that the current approach to dog control is misguided and does not protect people adequately, or animals for that matter. And I agree with that approach. And I hope the Minister will be crystal clear as to her view and that of Her Majesty's Government. It is important that we consider some of the background to this important issue. Sir George, Section 1 of the Dangerous Dogs Act 1991, also known as breed-specific legislation, makes it an offence to own, breed from, sell or exchange 4 dog breeds, the Pit Bull Terrier, Japanese Tosa, Dogo Argentina and Fila Brasilia. The police or local authority can take away a banned dog even if it's not acting dangerously, and there has not been a complaint. It is important to note, as honourable members already noted today, that owners can apply for an exemption order, and I would be grateful if the Minister can tell us how many owners have applied for an exemption in each of the last 5 years. And if she doesn't have access to that information today, I hope she will write to me to give me that information. This is important because if the court finds the banned dog is not a danger to public safety, it will be put on the index of exempted dogs, and the owner allowed to keep it in compliance with certain conditions, as we've already heard outlined today. I think that it would be helpful for colleagues if the Minister could outline if she thinks that the said conditions as they stand are suitable and effective. If not, how does she think they can be improved, and what work is she doing to improve them? The Dangerous Dogs Act was introduced to protect the public from dangerous dog attacks. Over 200,000 people are attacked by dogs in England alone every year. The Act prohibits breeds traditionally bred for fighting and makes it an offence for any dog to be dangerously out of control in our communities. However, since it was introduced, the number of fatalities from dog attacks each year has risen. Up to August 2017, there had been 73 fatal dog attacks in England and Wales since the Dangerous Dog Act was introduced. Hospital admissions, as we've already heard today, have increased by 81% since 2005, and so this is not something we can ignore. A UK Parliament petition called Replace Breed-Specific Legislation with a New Statutory Framework received over 118,000 signatures and was debated in Parliament on the 5th of July in 2021. This petition stated that BSL fails to achieve what Parliament intended to protect the public. It focuses on specific breeds, which fails to appreciate a dog is not aggressive purely on the basis of its breed. It allows seizure of other breeds, but the rules are not applied homogeneously by councils. It further states we need a system that focuses on the aggressive behaviour of dogs and the failure of owners to control their dog rather than the way a dog looks. And it calls on the government to reconsider a licensing system. These benches believe that safety must be our top priority, without unnecessarily punishing responsible dog owners or harming dogs that are not necessarily a risk. In other words, we need a realistic and objective approach. Now, Sir George, since the Dangerous Dogs Act came into force, as I indicated earlier, more people have been killed by dog attacks and more people are being admitted to hospital due to dog bites. We all know the feeling of horror, particularly when we receive the news of a child or young person killed by a dangerous dog, as highlighted by my friend, the Honourable Member for Caerphilly earlier. And indeed, our sympathies and condolences go out to all those affected by this issue. At the same time, Sir George, it's important and fair to note that too many harmless dogs are being destroyed simply because they are a banned breed, regardless of their temperament, behaviour, or indeed their surroundings. We must be more pragmatic when it comes to banning certain dogs based on their breed. All dogs can be dangerous in the wrong hands. Action to tackle dog bites and canine aggression must focus on the deed, not the breed, and requires proper resources, focus and attention, as my friend the Honourable Member for Ellesmere Port so eloquently stated earlier. In 2018, the EFRA Select Committee carried out an inquiry into breed-specific legislation, and the committee called for a full-scale review of current dog control legislation and policy to ensure the public is properly protected and animal welfare concerns addressed. It said changing the law on BSL is desirable, achievable, and would better protect the public. And I would welcome the Minister indicating her view on that inquiry. I would like to know if she supports the recommendations and what progress has been made to introduce and implement the recommendations, and what cross-nation engagement has taken place with the devolved governments of the United Kingdom. Like my colleagues on this side of the House, I believe we must follow the science and evidence. And I call on the Minister today to commit to a review of breed-specific legislation and the Dangerous Dogs Act as soon as possible, and to engage with local authorities, police and experts from other countries to develop a deeper understanding of different and successful approaches for the UK. Sir George, government-commissioned research by Middlesex University into dog control measures was published in December 2021 and concluded that dog ownership is insufficiently regulated. The government has said it remains concerned that lifting restrictions could lead to further tragedy, but has indicated it is considering its recommendations, which included improved recording of dog attack data and characteristics, and new legal requirements on dog ownership. And it would be good to have a further update on this from the Minister today, if possible. In our view, breed-specific legislation does not stop dogs biting children, young people and adults. It is bad for animal welfare because they cannot be rehomed in a controlled environment. Thousands of dogs are being euthanised, and that simply isn't a sustainable or fair solution. Not when we want to say that this country takes animal welfare seriously. And my honourable friend, the member for Chesterfield, highlighted very eloquently how people the length and breadth of the UK love their pets, and I wish his cat and dog a long and happy life. This side of the House wants to see a more holistic approach to dog control that focuses on prevention through education, responsible ownership and early intervention, as my honourable friend, the member for Caerphilly, stated earlier. As with so much of our national life since 2010, we can solve things if we want to, and I hope the Minister will instruct her officials to start making progress on the many points that have been made today. We have no time to waste. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir George, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship for this debate. I would like to thank the Honourable Member for Neath and all Honourable Members today to her for introducing today's debate, and to colleagues for their contributions, which have all been extremely well thought out and articulate and have highlighted both the pain for animals, the pain for owners on both sides of this equation, and how we value, I think it was the Honourable Member for Chesterfield who highlighted very eloquently how we value our pets, but how that can't be at the expense of making sure safety isn't paramount in our minds as well. As I go through this afternoon, I hope to give a little encouragement that we are already on the way to some of the things that honourable members have referred to. But I would be the first to stand here and say that we are gathering that evidence. And it's important as we work with many of the partners who have been mentioned here today, whether that is academics and the veterinary profession, whether that is our police, whether it's local authorities, whether it's our stakeholders. They are all key in making sure that we have the right evidence base in which to move forward. Now, yes, of course.
I'm very grateful. And I'm very encouraged to hear that the government's response is to look at the evidence moving forward when you're reviewing legislation such as this. This is a very sensitive and passionate area. We've heard some very powerful interventions and speeches today. Some dogs, sadly, are dangerous, and some behaviours are very dangerous as well, to people and, as we've heard, to animals. And when you put that in combination with powerful jaw structures and powerful dog bodies, then that becomes quite frightening. Some institutions, and the Honourable Member opposite talked about that we should be looking at the deed, not the breed. I am sympathetic to that, but can I maybe suggest to the Minister a middle ground moving forward perhaps would be to think, as we know that some breeds are dangerous, perhaps we could be thinking about this holistically and think about perhaps breed and or the deed.
Thank you, Sir George. I would like to thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I know he speaks as both a member in this place and an esteemed member of the veterinary profession. And I think pointing out that it isn't an all-or-nothing approach that we're looking for here is very timely, and I thank him for that. Now, you know, sadly, we've seen a number of tragic fatalities from dog attacks in recent months. Many of them have involved children, but not exclusively. And the government is already taking action to address this. And I want to set out today what we're doing. And as I say, working with those other stakeholders. And indeed, I was very heartened that the Honourable Member for Neath did reference that some of that work is already beginning to go underway. Because we have been working with stakeholders, the police, local authority, and the devolved administrations, which was a question I think raised by a couple of honourable members, in order to develop simple key messages to promote safer interactions, particularly between children and dogs. The Dog Safety Code was launched last week, highlights 3 key messages to all dog owners and families with children. And as the Honourable Member for Chesterfield said, and we know in our home, you know, a family pet is both a great asset and also has its own needs, and those needs have to be cared for. So be alert, always keep your eye on your dog when they're around children, and don't leave them alone together. Be aware, get to know your dogs. Dogs use signals to tell us how they feel, you know, when they are stressed. Be safe. Any dog can bite, and accidents happen very swiftly. Now, today is the start of Child Safety Week. The Department of Health and Social Care and the Department for Education are sharing this messaging, which will be used by health visitors and child safeguarding professionals as well. And we will continue this over the summer holidays because we want the Dog Safety Code to be embedded in future communications. And at this point, I would like to put on record my thanks to Marisa Heath from the canine and feline sector for her support in coordinating this work, because as many have said, actually others helping to get this right is what we need to do. Now, members I know are well aware of the work that we commissioned from Middlesex University to explore measures for reducing dog attacks and promoting responsible ownership across all breeds of dog. We published that report December last year, and in response to that, we then established the Responsible Dog Ownership Project with the police, with local authorities and animal welfare stakeholders in order to consider the recommendations that were in that report in detail, build on that evidence base and provide advice to the government. Now, it examines 4 areas, and I will go into some of the specifics, particularly the questions from the Honourable Member for Neath, but many of you brought up areas like enforcement. So it looks at strengthening enforcement, developing and supporting education initiatives, and that was seen as key, improving the quality and accessibility of dog training, and then something that I think was brought up by virtually every member, certainly for Neath, South Lanarkshire, I think for the Honourable Lady for South End and others, and that was the importance of data collection right the way through this system, whether that's hospitals to know when we've had the attacks, whether it's veterinary institutions, whether it's actually the police and so on, so that we know what we're dealing with. And we expect the work of that project to be concluded the early part of 2023, at which point the government will consider the advice and then work through on the next steps. But to some of the specific points that were made on breed-specific legislation and the fact it isn't working, simply repealing those things with no other changes wouldn't help public safety. And so that is why we are working on making sure we have the right evidence base. Simply repealing the breed-specific provisions contained in the Dangerous Dogs Act with no other changes made isn't something we're willing to do. And that is why we need to walk carefully through these things and make sure that we get to the right conclusions. Now, the Honourable Member also spoke about rehoming exempted dogs, and to that, The current legislation only permits transfer of keepership of prohibited dogs where the existing keeper has died or is seriously ill. Case law has also confirmed that a person with pre-existing relationship with the dog may apply to place it on the index, even if they're not the owner or the most recent keeper. And furthermore, on putting good-natured dogs down, which she also raised, here, any changes relating to the rehoming must consider the signals this sends about the acceptability of keeping these types of dogs, which we need to make sure that we draw that right balance, we find that middle ground, so that the legislation is both workable and enforceable, and also looks to care for the animal in the best possible way. Why the data is lacking was brought up, as I say, several times. Middlesex University report highlighted that so much more could be done here on the recording of dog attacks. And as I've said, we are working with all those institutions, as well as NHS Digital, to make sure that we get it in a timely way. Now, how we address dog attacks from other breeds, Section 3 of the Dangerous Dogs Act makes it an offence to allow a dog of any breed or any type to be dangerously out of control in any place. Now, in addition, the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act in 2014 includes specific measures to enable the police and local authorities to tackle irresponsible dog ownership before a dog attack occurs, including the use of community protection notices. It's important that we know what we have already, why it isn't working, or why it is working indeed. Dog-on-dog attacks, and I would like to extend my enormous sympathy. I've heard the Honourable Member for Southend talk about the attack of her constituent before, and it sounded utterly horrific. But existing powers allow dog-on-dog attacks to be tackled, including the issuing of community protection notices just mentioned, and the prosecution of the dogs under the 91 Act and also under the Dogs Act of 1871. But we've brought in new measures to crack down on dog attacks on livestock, and that will be going through the Animal Welfare Bill, because what we don't want to, through the Kept Animals Bill, what we don't want to do is be doing this piecemeal. We want to get it right. The Honourable Member for Neath also asked about what we can do to make sure that the time within kennels is looked at, and the interim exemption scheme allows dogs to remain with their owners in advance of a court hearing if the police determine the dog won't be pose a threat to public safety. And I'd like to assure her that DEFRA officials are working with the police forces right across the country to look at increasing uptake of that interim exemption scheme. And commercial kennels are required to meet the standards placed upon them, and they are also licensed by the local authority. Now, the Honourable Member for Chesterfield, I think, spoke about not judging a dog by their appearance, and the Middlesex report doesn't go as far as to say we should move away from breed-specific legislation, but it does recognise that a range of factors need to be considered, and that is why I am hopeful that when they come forward early in 2023, we will have the framework to move forward. And finally, under the responsible dog ownership, again, looking at additional legal requirements on dog ownership, that report did recommend that we looked at new legal requirements, including a basic standard of dog owners to demonstrate a minimum standard of dog knowledge and be on a register attesting to this fact. We also have made sure that we're looking to make improvements in the microchipping regime, because the database there is complex. There's, I think, some 17 different ones, and they need bringing into one place. Yes.
Will the government look at the possibility, at least, of licensing dogs?
So, When the evidence comes back, we will obviously be looking at the evidence that is brought forward. We microchip all our dogs, and if a microchipping database works effectively and we have a good education programme, that should actually, I would argue, be sufficient, but we are waiting with an open mind until the evidence comes back. I really do understand the strength feeling that exists around breed-specific legislation, but the government must balance the views of those who want to repeal with our responsibility to protect the public. We remain concerned that lifting the current restrictions may not be the optimum move forward. However, the Responsible Dog Ownership Project will explore these issues more widely, and any changes that we may make will need to ensure that public safety remains the absolute paramount point in the heart of the regime. I hope that colleagues are reassured that we take this seriously, as we should. It's an important subject, and I look forward to carrying on the collegiate conversation with colleagues to ensure that we can get this right.
Can I call Christina Rees to wind up?
Thank you, Sir George. I think we've had a very good debate, and I thank all honourable members for their excellent, thought-provoking contributions. And there is agreement that the Dangerous Dogs Act 1991 is not fit for purpose. I thank the Minister for her responses, and I urge the Minister, who I know is very magnanimous, to continue to comprehensively review the legislation and act on expert evidence to find what is called a middle ground, but a middle ground that works, because it's not working at the moment. I mean, I think we need breed-neutral legislation which protects the public, safeguards dogs, and responsible dog owners. And finally, I'd like to thank the petitioner, Anita, for raising this very important matter and for her determination in campaigning to repeal breed-specific legislation and reform dangerous dogs legislation. Thank you, Sir George.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 603988 relating to breed-specific legislation. As many of that opinion say aye? Reluctantly. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it in a whisper. Order, order. The sitting now stands adjourned.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.